Hello, and welcome to the Presentations to Impress online tutorial created for Brunel Headstart. My name is Courtney Huff, and I'm an Academic Skills Advisor for Ask Academic Skills at Brunel University. Now, the goals for this tutorial are, first, to understand some of the common presentation pitfalls and how to avoid them, thinking about how to structure a presentation, the importance of clear, relevant visual aids, and thinking about how to conquer nerves and be confident. Now, the number one thing you need to think about with a presentation is why you're doing it, so that you can focus it very carefully. Presentations are different from writing an essay in that you have to be very targeted. You can't say as much as you would write on a page because people would get lost. So you have to think very carefully. What am I hoping to achieve? What's my goal? Am I just here to inform? Am I here to get a high mark? If so, what is it that people are expecting to see? So you want to always think about what your goals are and then think about them both visually and verbally from the audience perspective. What is it they need to see so that I can achieve my goal? So with that in mind, you need to know your audience. Who are they? What do they do? Odds are if you're a student, they are your markers, and hopefully they know, some of them know you. They might be your tutors, people that you've met in class or in office hours. So you want to be thinking about where they're coming from, what their perspective is. You want to think about what they already know about the subject, what their relationship is to you, what interests them, and how what you're going to say will affect them. These are all aspects to consider. If you don't consider these aspects, what can happen is you might find yourself pitching your argument too high in a way that's not interesting to them, or pitching it too low, in which case they might feel patronized or bored. You might alienate them by saying something the wrong way. So you always want to be thinking about their perspective and what it is you're trying to accomplish with that regard. The next thing to bear in mind is that it needs to be very, very tightly structured. As I just mentioned, it's not like writing an essay where you have time to revise and put it all, in clear paragraphs, and you can't say as much as you would in a paragraph. Just typing out 5 pages of text and then reading it is not going to produce a good presentation because it won't sink into the people who are watching you. So you want to be very careful to think about how you should structure it. And the first thing you want to do is set the scene. You want to hook your audience. You want to give them a reason to keep listening. So find some way. It might be use an interesting quotation or a great image that's really eye-catching, something that really lays out the groundwork for what you're about to talk about. Then you want to go right into your key message. Whatever the main point or main idea is that you want to communicate, you want to say it first. Don't save it for the conclusion. Don't save it the best for last. You want to put it in there straight away and make sure that they know why they're there to listen to you, what it is you are going to communicate to them. Once you've got that key message laid out there, then you want to back up that point. So you'll make an assertion and provide some evidence and explanation of what that assertion is. And you'll do that a couple of times. That's really all you're doing in a presentation. You're backing up with a few different pieces of evidence, a key idea. And then the most important thing is to return to that idea at the end. Go back to your key message so that they don't forget and they know what your overall point was. So in some ways, the structure is very similar to writing an essay, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you said. But you want to make it even clearer and more straightforward. Now here's the problem that people encounter most often when translating their ideas into a presentation. Does anyone know what it is? Probably do. Here's what not to do. You don't want PowerPoint slides that look like this, all right? There's too much text, there's no margins, things overlap each other, it's very hard to read, and the colors are horrible and clashing. And what results is that somebody presenting this, the audience is going to just read what's on the page instead of listening to what you're saying, which is probably what you're doing right now. So stop reading and listen to me. So how do you avoid this, right? It's a big fail. The main thing, again, is keep it simple and distill your points down to very simple, straightforward ideas. Those 3 assertions I talked about. All right. So if you think back at that previous slide, it was talking about employment and women and how higher numbers of women are in part-time employment. Really, you just need the one main idea. So you might have a slide that looks like this. One statement, an image, something eye-catching, but really it's just a complement to whatever you're saying in the presentation. It's a supplement. It is not a replacement for your note cards. It is not your entire dissertation on slides. That's the change you have to make when you go from writing an essay to giving a presentation. Because this is the key thing about PowerPoint. Presentations are visual. It's about helping them see what you're saying, not providing them with your entire presentation on slides. If somebody says to you, "Can I have your slides after the presentation, so I can take them with me?" Well, sure, it might be good for them to have them, but if everything they need to know is on those slides, then why have a presentation at all? So bear that in mind when you prepare presentations. The problem is there's a certain standard in academia, and you'll find this throughout your time at university. There's a certain expectation when you give an academic presentation about what needs to be on those slides. And you probably know what it is. Bullets, right? Bullet points, more exactly, not these kinds of bullets. But there's a certain look, right? You put a lot of information on the slides, and they're all bulleted, and they cover every point you're going to cover. Right? So what is a good student to do so that you're not constantly having to use bullets, but that you're also not creating this, overfilled, text-heavy slide for every single point of your presentation? The thing to remember is to have a lot of space on your slides. Don't fill it up with text, and try to use small amounts of text for each bullet, sometimes even a single word if you can, and make sure there are lots of margin space around the edge of the slide. As you can see on this slide and all of the others, I've left a lot of white space so that the text is easy to read, and hopefully people will just glance at it and then go back to listening to me. Remember that lining everything up really makes a difference in how easy it is to read the slides, so make sure you're properly using bullets so that everything lines up at the same margin. And finally, use images with care. It's a good idea to use images, right, to illustrate your points, but don't overwhelm them either. Don't use tons of images on one slide or lots of different images that are of different styles. You want to keep it really consistent. In terms of consistency, bear in mind you should also use just one font. These are a couple of different examples of types of fonts that are good to use. You have two different kinds. They're called sans serif and serif. So the sans serif ones don't have the little bits on the ends of each letter, as you can see with the serif fonts. Helvetica, Geneva, and Gale Sans are just some of the typical ones. Times New Roman is very common for the serif fonts. It doesn't really matter as long as you don't use a whole bunch of different fonts. That gets confusing and it's too much on the eyes. Fonts to avoid are things like anything that's going to be a little harder to read, unless you're just using it to establish one straightforward point, that like you're using it for one word, that's fine. But avoid using something like script for if there's going to be lots of bullet points of text. You also want to make sure that people aren't looking at the font. They should be thinking about what you have to say and what you're communicating. So if they're busy looking at the font, it's probably not a good choice. You also want to avoid anything that's juvenile or silly. Most PowerPoint presentations are about professionalization and showing your professional development. So, try to keep it to the straightforward fonts. And finally, avoid the font Comic Sans. This is known as one of the worst fonts in the history of typography, and if you ask anyone who knows about typography, they will agree with me on this. So just avoid it. It's juvenile and it's badly designed, and if you get the one person in the audience who detests it, they won't forgive you, believe me. So seriously, don't use it, ever. Another way to cope with the fact that you are expected to put a lot of text on your slides is to introduce the information gradually, as I've been doing throughout this presentation. Rather than have the whole slide up with everything on it, use a small animation to have the text appear as you are working. So you have the point that reading is not listening, keep it simple, use single words and partial phrases, and think about your use of effects. That is much more easy for you to absorb when I bring them up bit by bit than if I brought up the whole slide in one go. So think about that as an option. Next, remember you need to rehearse. Again, it's not like an essay. It's a performance. So take the time and make sure, don't worry about being embarrassed, but find somebody that you can do the presentation for and practice it, because they will spot things that you won't spot when you practice on your own. There's lots of other useful things for that as well. For one thing, you don't want to be relying entirely on notes or slides. You don't want to be reading. You need to be speaking in a more relaxed manner for it to be considered a good presentation. So as I've said, you want to speak more naturally than you would if you were reading. You also want to be very careful not to run over your allotted time. This is a real annoyance to certain markers and people at conferences and events. So make sure that you practice enough that you know exactly how long the presentation is. And just as a bit of information, one double-spaced typed page of A4 is about 2 minutes of speaking. So if you're doing, say, a 5-minute presentation and you want to type it out entirely first, that's only 2.5 pages of text. So bear that in mind as you begin writing a presentation. You should also bear in mind that body language has a huge effect in how people perceive you in a presentation. It can help you convey various tones and emotions. For example, here, the person with their arms crossed is looking a bit defiant, and it's not a good idea to cross your arms during a presentation. You want to feel open to the audience. You want to show them that you care about their contribution, for example. So you shouldn't cross your arms. Conversely, this person has their arms open and is clearly gesturing, and gestures are a good way to keep an audience engaged and also to help you feel relaxed. Standing up straight, using your gestures, looking around at the audience, you will actually feel more confident if you act more confident, even if at the start you're not. So consider that body language can have that sort of effect on how you perform in a presentation. So various things to avoid. Continuous eye contact. Try not to pick one person and stare at them. You will worry them very much. So if you have trouble making eye contact with different people throughout, pick a spot towards the back of the room on the wall and just glance at that now and then. It looks like eye contact even if you're not actually making eye contact. Otherwise you might stare and freak people out. Turning upstage. This upstage is a drama term, right? So you don't want to put your back to the audience. So always try to remember you're not turning to read your slides, you're facing them and hopefully just gesturing back to your slides at various times. Watch out if you are one of those people who play with your hair, you might rub your eyes, any of those kind of repetitive gestures can be very disconcerting. Clearing your throat is another nervous gesture that people often do. Aggressiveness. Sometimes people get very excited about what they're talking about and they're very passionate, and that's good, but you want to make sure that you don't turn your audience off by becoming too aggressive, or you're making your gestures too aggressive, or putting them off, or putting them on the back foot in some way. So just again, this is why you need to practice for somebody else so that they can help catch those types of behaviors before you have that problem. Again, crossing your arms, as I noted earlier. Shuffling your feet. Some people walk around and sway back and forth, and it's very frustrating to watch, especially, again, if it's a repetitive movement. So try not to let those nerves overwhelm you, and just stay in one place or move with purpose if you're going to move around. Choose to walk back and forth, but don't do it in a very regular way. Try to do it naturally. And watch out for your responses to audience questions, for example. If somebody asks a question that you think is stupid, don't show it, right? Thank them for the question and then answer it honestly. Good body language. Obviously stand up straight, face the audience, hold your head high. Again, this will also help you perform better. It's not just about how the audience perceives you, it is how you will perceive yourself. Use your hands, right? Gesture, as long as they're not aggressive gestures. Try to make them different. Again, repetitive movements are what is disconcerting. Nod your head and smile to emphasize what you're saying, as well as when somebody asks you a question, for example. Make proper eye contact, which means you might make eye contact with the odd person here and there, but they should always be different people. You don't want to be staring at one person or continually returning to one person. So, in summary, remember, it's different from an essay. You have to distill down completely so that people listening to you speak will register what you're saying. Think about PowerPoint as a complement to what you are saying and not a stand-in for your note cards. Think visually. Remember it's a performance, and never ever use Comic Sans as your font. Also remember that you need to know your resources. Ask Academic Skills is always here to help. You can email us at ask@brunel.ac.uk. We're located on the ground floor of the library, and as a special service, we do offer a feedback service for presentations. So if you want to come in and give your presentation, we will help you discover what any of your nervous habits might be. Thanks, and I hope you've enjoyed this presentation.